the Civil Affairs Association, for hosting this and the great work that you're doing and just bringing us together as a community, keeping everybody informed and allowing folks venues to think deeply about, write about, and publish on our profession. We got a lot to cover. Mr. Cahill and I will be tag teaming on this brief. I'll cover the first 10 slides, and then for everyone's essay, I have to punch out. I'll be handing off to Mr. Cahill. As I have another briefing, I have to give at 1400. But again, appreciate it. We're going to give you, this was our opportunity. We appreciate it from the CAA to just update the audience on, how we're organized and what we're getting after in terms of proponency issues, force modernization for civil affairs. A lot to cover, so I'm going to hit the highlights. You have the briefings, and then obviously Mr. Cahill and myself are available to folks at any point to discuss. Our emails are on the front slide. So Dennis, if you could go ahead and share the slides. All right, so we had some changes at Fort Bragg. Yep, if we can go to the next slide. We had some changes at Fort Bragg, some substantial reorganization over the last year. In 2019, at the direction of Lieutenant General Bodette, we established a USOC Force Modernization Center. And what that did is consolidate all force modernization for the enterprise in one location, because it had been kind of spread out over the enterprise and made it more difficult to synchronize and have a coherent way forward and ensure that everybody was getting the resources they needed. So USASOC, as is the proponent for all RSOF, but it is also the force modernization proponent for Civil Affairs Branch, PSYOP Branch, and SF Branch. And then, the assigned units, 75th Ranger Regiment and 160th Aviation. You can see in that center slide, and further slides you'll see our structure, but that created the 06 capability manager section, lead section within USASOC at the USASOC staff level. And I think you can see across the board, we have capability manager directorate. So there's a special forces capability manager, a civil affairs capability manager, a psychological operations capability manager, all 06 positions. The SF position may change, may be downgraded due to the capability manager director position, but there's representation from all those entities in our capability manager section. But what it does is it puts us in the same organization and better connected to the G9, the Capability Development Integration Directorate, and then the G8, the Field and Force Integration Directorate, as well as ties to the Army. Headquarters DA, FC or AFC, FCC, SOD, and then we work hand in hand. The two boxes highlighted in purple, with the Special Operations Center of Excellence, work hand in hand with the branch proponents. But this was intended to ensure that we were, per General Bodette, fully integrated with the Army and synchronized with SOCOM. And that was a paradigm shift in mindset for a lot of folks within the headquarters. We've been building this plane in flight for the last year, but I will tell you from a civil affairs standpoint, it has been very good. It has elevated our access and the support we get. So next slide. This just gives you that picture of kind of how we're functioning, or we're functioning and centered as the Civil Affairs Capability Manager Directorate. Again, hand in hand with the proponent, which I'll get into their slides and how they're set, but at SWIC, they're responsible for doctrine development, training development, leader development, and personnel management. Then hand in hand with the G9 at USASOC, that's working all the concepts, policy issues, but also being tied, we're that nexus with the G8, which when we talk equipment and BOIs and ties to the Army on the resources we need. Again, it centers us. We're the synchronizer and the integrator across .MLPFP for civil affairs capability. And a lot of work, but I think we're positioned better than we were before. Next slide. So I'm going to talk the CA branch proponent at SWIC first. Give you essay. Lieutenant Colonel Scott Dickerson is the CA proponent director, and this is a look at their structure. Again, reorganization. This removes force modernization. The billets and the personnel we had originally at SWIC. This is the set that's now at proponent. In constant process of evolution, but really what it gives you is a doctrine crew, a training section, personnel section, and the new piece on the right is still being sorted out, but establishing a leader development section, which I think is, and I'll get into that in the next slide, but I think is a great thing for the branch. But again, the proponent has doctrine, training, leadership, development, personnel, and then for everyone's essay, by AR 522, Major General Roberson is the Civil Affairs Commandant. He is the Psychological Operations Commandant and the SF Commandant. And Lieutenant Colonel Dickerson works directly for him. Next slide. So what, some of the things, the main priorities that the branch proponent and Lieutenant Colonel Dickerson, his team has been working on, an urgent revision of FM 357. We did the force modernization assessment over the last 2 years, really in-depth, deep dive into the capability, into the future operating environment. What tasks do we need to be able to accomplish across competition, conflict, and return to competition as a capability? What do we need to be able to do to help commanders win? And that process really allowed us to capture a lot of lessons learned that we've learned over the last 15 years, as well as that future look. So all that's going into a revision of FM 357. The target for that is to be released next summer. I think it will be going out to the field here in the next couple of months for the CRM and feedback. And obviously we need great input from across the force and at echelon to get it right. But I think it's a great step forward, continued progress and evolution for civil affairs. That next bullet, they're always, the doctrine team is always reviewing all the publications that come out and ensuring proper civil affairs integration. But I think one of the exciting things is the Army is relooking FM 3.0, which is the primary operations manual. They've actually asked our proponent folks, based on the work that has been done and what that they've distilled out already in FM 357, to help them write how consolidation of gains works for the Army. I think that's a great testament to the folks we have in our branch and the depth of thought and the hard work that's went into it, that they recognized our work was solid enough that they asked us to help them get it right for the Army, which I think the new FM 3.0, when that comes out, will also be another step forward for the branch. The Combined Arms Training Strategy Operational Planning Team, they've been running that, and again, as part of the FMA, it really a refinement of what tasks do we need to accomplish. That'll result in an update to our AUDL, but really redoing the individual and collective task list for our branch, so that we're training on the right things. Units have the right tasks to be able to have, so that METs are right, and focused on the right things with the right rigor built into those tasks. And that I've said this before, maybe not to this forum, but as a branch, if your doctrine's not right, your training's not right, your tasks aren't right, your training's not going to be right institutionally or at the unit level, so you're always going to struggle. And I think this is another really positive step forward. A lot of hard work going into ensuring that we're getting it right and we're training our folks on the right thing. So again, in interest of time, because we got a lot of stuff to cover, the CA Leader Development Roadmap, as I showed on the org slide, actually establishing a leader development section within our proponent, that's something we've not had. And really the look is, how do we put, what we do as civil affairs is extremely difficult graduate level work. I mean, understanding human dynamics and understanding populations, is the, you could argue the most difficult thing in the world. But how do we, across the progression of an NCO or an officer's career, provide the right educational opportunities focused on our profession so that we're building depth and knowledge and expertise? And that has a lot of support from General Roberson. A direct quote from him, he is an SF 2-star, but we were talking and he's like, Jay, a lot of stuff we do in SF, we can just, we get that through training. He's like, you guys need training and you need in-depth education. Like, roger that, sir. So building out that program, I think is going to be a great opportunity for our NCO and officer corps and really set us on a good path going forward. Next slide, please. So this is the laydown of the capability management division. Again, I'm the capability manager. Mr. Dennis Cahill on the line is my deputy capability manager. And we have 2 branches: concepts, exercise, and experimentation, and then requirements and capability integration branch. 14 folks, and our job is to make sure that our future force and going into the field of force is, developed, documented, and resourced. And if you can go to the next slide. So a lot of what we've done over the last year on that first bullet is getting our team. You can imagine structural change like this within an organization, just a lot of administrative pieces to this. And then we were literally building the UFMC from scratch, from a concept into something of execution. So it's been a lot of work just getting our team integrated, getting all the administrative pieces done to get our folks transferred to USASOC, integrated into the team, and then, through that connected to the Army, through AFC, FCC, and maintain our hooks with CAC and TRADOC, and then also having the requirements for with requirements through SOCOM as well. So at 15:30 today, I give a pitch on our force modernization assessment. Again, 2-year process, hard look at the piece. I know everybody's been waiting for that finalization of the functional solution analysis report. That has been approved by General Roberson. We're to be briefing General Bodette in the next week or 2, and then that'll be solidified final. But a key thing that we've been working on, going on for the last year, and it's changed names some, but is my team has been fully integrated with the Waypoint 2028 effort with the Army, because the Army has been taking a hard look at how does it need to be structured, what can we achieve in 2028, and then 2035 and beyond. And there's been 5 lines of effort that they've been running out of CAC, and you can see them listed there before you. And those are constant efforts, multiple meetings per week, per LU, and our team is part of, I'm sorry, and I'm not sure everybody can see the slides, and maybe it's just some people, but I think we have them pushed. But going back to the lines of effort, and Lieutenant General Rainey is the Combined Arms Center commander. Our integration in that is ensuring that as we move forward, civil affairs is integrated correctly at echelon and across the warfighting functions. And the other components of that to ensure it, you can see the next bullet down, the functional and supporting concept development piece. We have a cut on every concept that comes out from all the other branches and warfighting functions and COEs across the Army. And that's a tremendous amount of work reading those and ensuring our capabilities integrated. But it's been an exciting time too, because the Army has had everyone relook all their concepts. So it's given us a chance in a very short time to relook at how we're written and accounted for and integrated in across the Army conceptually, and then, on the Waypoint 2028 and very real means of change that will happen rapidly in the next several TAAs for our set. The third, or I guess, I'm sorry, the fifth bullet down, the Civil Affairs Solution Army. That's the software solution that we've been working towards for several years. Right now, it's a commercial piece. There's several, it's commercial only. The ultimate goal for that is to be a software system that facilitates our personnel at echelon being able to understand the operational environment and integrate civil knowledge into the operations targeting and intel processes. We have submitted a technological maturation initiative proposal that we were #1 in the Army. We're waiting on the decision for it to come through, but that would put us on a direct path for a program record for that software system. Also, as a team, and I know this came up this morning, you know, tied to that, we through USASOC are tied into Project Convergence, and how do we leverage AI, machine learning, and other pieces and pull those into our software solution in terms of CAS-A to really be able to analyze, evaluate, and understand the operational environment. And then that last bullet, we stood up a military government, transitional governance, operational planning team to really look at how are we getting after what was transitional governance, but our 38 golf capability. When that was stood up, there was a lot of work done on the P and .MLPFP, the personnel side, but not so much across the board. So I think in the coming year, great folks at UC-CAPOC that's been working this hard, Colonel Scott and Jesse, you know, as a group, how do we have the right coherent concept of employment? How do we structure that right so that we're delivering that capability with all the changes and advancements of the 21st century. Next slide, please. All right, again, I'm running behind, so I'll go quick. I'm taking up all Dennis's time. With that 38 golf piece, there's been a FDU junior that's working through the Army that takes the number of overall 38 golf authorizations from 500 and some odd to 216. And I think that's a great bridging strategy to the OPT we're doing to set that number in the right way, so it provides, you know, our CA force and then Army and Joint Force and interagency folks the right capability. For SA, that top bullet, the 38X program, that is something that's been approved for on the active component side for enlisted accessions. You know, we're able to assess enlisted folks and to go to our basic and AIT on the reserve side. Didn't have that capability on the active side, and that is being worked. The information advantage, and that's part of the previous, you know, what I was talking about on the previous slide of the lose that the Army's working. We have been working hand in hand with Cyber Center of Excellence and the Combined Arms Center for over a year as the Army really looks at how do they get after information advantage, what is CA's role into that, and what's that structure look like with the Army. I can say that's still an ongoing and a work of, you know, a lot of work in progress to be made, but we're knee deep in it. The Todd Bizdak and the folks at Shaw have been looking at rewriting the Civil Affairs DOD, the directive, and we've been part of that. And we're tied fully into the integration or irregular warfare forums that are being run across the Army. That's really a key component to the Army's been focused big time in DOD on lethality and large scale combat operations, which is critical, but we can't lose sight of the criticality of irregular warfare and the IW annex, and how do we really get after that as a nation, and our capability is a key component of that. So next slide. This is just for everyone's essay. This is a draft of what will be the updated logic map in the revised FM 357. And I just ask you, you know, take some time to look at this afterwards, but really some refinement of, you know, what are civil affairs operations? What's the role of civil affairs? A change in our core competencies, and I know I talked this at the last symposium, to really having four core competencies as a branch. You know, the missions we execute, how do we do that through the stability mechanisms? And, you know, at the end of the day, how do we ensure that we're integrated in the intel, ops, and targeting processes to achieve, you know, the effects and enable commanders to win. Next slide. This is another good takeaway slide. It just shows that conceptually, that operational approach of, hey, when you look at what we have, what are the authorities we have, what are we integrated into, what are the ways that civil affairs helps the Army achieve the ends that it needs. And it's really through those four core competencies of civil network development engagement, civil knowledge integration, civil military integration, and transitional governance. I think, you know, at this point, I'm going to transition to Dennis, and a lot of what I've just said on these previous two slides will make sense in how it's articulated and what we do in large-scale combat operations, as well as in a competition environment. So with that, I'll pass it off to Dennis.
All right, thanks, Jay, and I hope everybody can hear me. And I tried to answer a couple of the questions in the Q&A, and I'll go back to it again a little bit later. One thing that, before I get into this, I wanted to put a plug in for the 1CA podcast that was released last week. Lieutenant Colonel Dickerson, the proponent manager, was interviewed, and again, he gets into a little bit about the results of the CA Force Mod assessment, but he also touches on some of the same things that Colonel Liddick just described in the last two slides and what you'll see in the following slides. So, as Colonel Liddick discussed, the CA Capability Management Team participates in a multitude of events and working groups, and our focus is to integrate civil affairs into joint Army special operations concepts and experiments that are all focused on the future force structure and future operations. In every venue, we've observed that people have unique and individual interpretations of what civil affairs is based on his or her personal experience or readings on of some now outdated documents. So these forums and this forum today gives us an opportunity to educate our counterparts across Army Futures Command, TRADOC, USASOC, and others on what Colonel Liddick just went over in those last two slides. It allows us to frame how civil affairs forces will support operations across the competition continuum in new ways. What this slide does is it outlines some of the themes and messages that we use in the Waypoint 2028 LOE discussions and those experimentation events. In the first two bullets, we acknowledge that civil affairs plays a role in information operations, like our Marine Corps brothers and sisters do. But we see our role in enabling, enhancing, or providing governance as an active part of maneuver support and the maneuver support function. In fact, the Army usually bins civil affairs under maneuver support in depictions of the Army in Waypoint 2028 and Aimpoint 2035. The third bullet on this slide is a way to explain and operationalize the new definition of civil affairs, which you'll see in the revision of FM 3-57. And the fourth bullet summarizes what we expect civil affairs forces to do in competition, large-scale combat operations, and rear areas during large-scale combat operations, and of course the transition back to competition. And you'll see these three sub-bullets in the lower left-hand corner of the next three slides. So these next three slides are used in many of the Waypoint and concept forums and experiment events that I mentioned, and we felt they would be useful in today's discussion to the CA community of interest. The top third of this slide identifies the 4 echelons of civil affairs formations and the roles and functions of each in competition, and which is the main focus, of course, of this symposium. The next 2 slides are the same for large-scale combat operations and rear area of operations. But at this point, I need to emphasize that the line and block charts shown here are not final. We in the CA Force Mod or the CA Capability Manager's Office are in the middle of working through the operational and organizational concepts for these formations. And these structures will change as we experiment the capabilities and organizational designs required for future operations. But the main part of this slide is the operational graphic in the middle. And in this case, just imagine that we're looking at any theater army executing operations during extended periods of competition. The theater includes permissive, semi-permissive, and denied areas, and it may occasionally experience disaster events that require international support from military and civilian organizations in unified action. In this diagram, those hash marks, the hash marked areas are population centers. And the arrows depict the linkages and networks that tie those centers together. The icons depict civil affairs operations executed by special operations and conventional civil affairs forces with interorganizational or unified action partners in persistent engagement according to theater objectives. And as you see in the first bullet in the lower left-hand corner, these civil affairs forces are the DoD's primary linkages to the 3 Ds in whole of government approaches. And some of the speakers this morning mentioned that. The rectangular figure in blue outlines an example of a CA task force that can be stood up to provide command and control over US response to a particular disaster that requires, in this case, medical, engineer, and MP capabilities, in addition to civil affairs and interagency assets. And of course, we hope that everything we do in competition results in never having to execute large-scale combat operations. But everything we do in competition is also important for successfully executing large-scale combat operations and the eventual transition back to competition. During competition, civil affairs forces map the human terrain, establish relationships and civil networks, and help foreign nations build resiliency that will be important for executing civil affairs operations in large-scale combat operations. In this operational graphic, we show civil affairs formations attached to maneuver units according to current doctrine and rules of allocation. The CA icons in the area of influence depict civil affairs operations and unified action partner activities executed during competition in areas that may now be forward of the forward line of troops. But the idea is that under certain conditions, civil affairs forces and unified action partners behind the forward line of troops, as well as special operations forces in the deep areas, still have access to the networks and other resources that are there in the area of influence that contribute to information advantage and the ability of friendly forces to maneuver in virtual cognitive and temporal and physical spaces. The bottom line is that civil affairs forces are critical to maneuver at all echelons during large-scale combat operations and should not be left behind the berm to be called forward when rear areas are secure. The last bullet in the bottom left-hand corner lead into the activities on the next slide. According to FM 3-0 operations, the Army, as part of the joint force, conducts offense, defense, and stability simultaneously, with stability operations beginning early in the rear area or consolidation area, while combat operations are still ongoing elsewhere in the battle space. This fact, of course, was evident in World War II, as Allied forces first took Italy and then maneuvered across Europe, liberating towns and countries in the rear as the front lines progressed from Normandy to Berlin. It was also evident in Iraq, as Allied forces drove north from the Kuwait border to Baghdad, and as special operations and conventional forces drove down from the Turkish border to south to Mosul and Kirkuk. In Iraq, some people call this a rolling phase 4, but there was no approved plan for stabilizing following the dominating peace in any part of the country when Saddam's statue fell on the 9th of April in 2003. But we're changing this, and thanks to the lessons that were relearned during OAF, which appeared in the first DoD Directive 3000.05, and ultimately trickled down into Joint and Army Doctrine on Stability, we have the foundations for reinforcing the role of civil affairs forces in rear areas, which are found in the lower left-hand corner of this slide. We do this routinely in experimentation events. So our message reiterates the fact that civil affairs formations tap into existing political, economic, social, and other civil networks that would normally exercise the stability activities of civil security, civil control, essential services, economic and infrastructure development, and governance long before military forces arrive. Our ability to consolidate gains in rear areas successfully depends on how well CA forces executed their core competencies in the theater during periods of competition. So at this point, we've gone just about 32 minutes. So we'll end our part of the brief here. I'll put another plug in for the one CA interview of Lieutenant Colonel Dickerson, and we'll wait to entertain some questions when all the briefers have finished this afternoon. So I'll stop the sharing of my slides and move on to the next briefer.
Scott, you want to pick it up at PKSOI, please?
Sure, sir, absolutely. So appreciate the introduction, and want to thank the association again for letting us have this opportunity to kind of share what's going on in the realm of the Peacekeeping Stability Operation Institute. I also want to thank the other panelists for what they're sharing and us being able to talk through how they relate to one another. And I think that it could spur some good discussion inside of this community. And then I also want to thank the folks who are attending and listening to what we're talking about, because this is a big community that is heavily involved in the area of stabilization. And it's something that I think we need to look at really hard inside of our Army. And so this is a good opportunity for us to share and maybe level some bubbles across the board. And I want to just express that as I get started. So I don't have any slides to push. I just want to kind of give folks an update on the state of what's going on inside of the Army's Peacekeeping Stability Operation Institute. So PKSOI is about 1 year, or actually a little bit more than 1 year into the completion of our transition. So we belong to the Combined Arms Center. We transitioned 1 October of last year from being an entity of the War College to now working for the Combined Arms Center at Leavenworth, though we remain firmly entrenched here at Carlisle Barracks. We still are a key organization inside of DoD that's focused on stabilization and peace operations. We work to enable global operations, and we are still gathering lessons and working to build rapport and work with relationships that have been established in some cases for up to 25 years across that peacekeeping and stabilization community of interest. The Army was designated by the SecDef in 2019 as the joint proponent for peacekeeping and stability operations. That's important because prior to that, that designation had actually rested with PKSOI as an institute rather than with a service. And so the SecDef determined that he was going to place it with a service. The Army was given that. And in essence, those tasks have been pushed from Army through TRADOC to the CAC and really still remain with PKSOI. And so while the organization has been significantly reduced in size, we are still working to do many of the tasks that are those joint stabilization and peacekeeping tasks. Really, we look in three areas that we are focused on. We work to advance U.S. policy, we work to support the interagency, and quite frankly, we strive to maintain some strategic impact for the Army as well as for the greater community of interest. One of the ways we work to advance U.S. policy is really looking at the National Defense Strategy's line of effort of strengthening alliances and attracting new partners. So working with allies and partners, the joint force can amass its greatest ability to have strength, deter aggression, and support stability, or as we say in the U.S. doctrine, stabilization. not doctrine, excuse me, policy. PKSOI supports these efforts with international organizations such as the UN or NATO, and PKSOI supports the implementation plan of the Irregular Warfare Annex to the NDS. So we're working in that process as well, and I know that's been talked about probably before throughout the day, and I'm sure we'll talk about it throughout the remainder of the symposium. And that annex actually outlines DoD's role in operations that are below the threshold of armed conflict, and I know you guys are all tracking that. We also provide policy expertise at the strategic and operational levels in order to mitigate state fragility and prevent, contain, and resolve armed conflict. We do this, PKSOI does this primarily with our work with the UN and NATO operations, and mostly in the assessment realm. And we work to fulfill tasks that are given to DoD that support national, multinational, and coalition operations. When you look at interagency items and things that PKSOI is working on, we're the lead author for 3 joint and 1 NATO doctrinal publications. So while it's a small team, we still maintain those responsibilities. And we work with the UN and other US government agencies, as well as non-governmental agencies and stakeholders on the civilian stabilization and peace operations realm to do peer-reviewed publications. So essentially we write articles and we publish them and we get people talking about that at the upper level, at least we hope to do that. We also house a repository of lessons learned that are intended to support the emerging needs of planners across the joint force, and they cover the gamut of stabilization challenges. Now, this has been a little interesting in the last year because we used to do that through a proprietary program known as Solemns that allowed folks to input lessons directly regardless of their affiliation. In other words, they didn't have to be a member of the US government and DoD and have a CAT card to enter that and put their lessons in directly. However, Solemns has sunset as a program, which means it doesn't exist anymore. And so we've had to transition those lessons into JULIS. That becomes a little challenging when someone from outside the United States wants to share a lesson, and we have a way to do that. There's actually a button on our website called Ask PKSOI, and folks can contact us that way, and we'll work their lessons that way. And we are working right now on another solution set that will allow folks to input lessons directly, and then we can then transfer that into JULIS. But we still are a repository of lessons learned. We still are trying to gather lessons learned. It's just been a little bit of a challenge as we work through the shrinking of the organization. We also continue to, I talked about supporting forces and lessons learned. We also remain heavily committed to working with our interagency partners such as Department of State and USAID, primarily for civil military engagement on complex multinational operations. The team also engages with the international community to integrate current thoughts and practices within the interagency. And we do it by researching, as I discussed earlier, and writing, but we also do that by participating in a variety of forums that may be hosted. We do that by working with the Geographic Combatant Commands and the Army Service Component Commands in multinational training exercises, from their design all the way through their execution sometimes, to enable military to military relationships and enhance partner capabilities. We've got a wide range of partners and stakeholders that are across a real diverse community of interest. You know, not necessarily just folks that are inside of the stabilization realm, but some folks in academia and across the board. We try to host events that bring that broad scope of parties together to have discussions on a routine basis and to collaborate on critical issues and concerns. One example of this would be our annual strategic stability seminar, which is a one-day forum that we host inside of the Beltway there, usually at the AUSA headquarters. We did that in conjunction with AUSA, and we would usually focus on a specific Geographic Combatant Command's region for a day and look at what were the stability items there. Unfortunately, this year we had to cancel that because of COVID and just not being able to line that in. We just weren't able to really do that. And so we've had to cancel, where we're looking at how we do that in the future. We are partnering next year in the September timeframe with the War, Peace, and Justice Symposium. Now this is a pretty large group of partners that include the Dickinson College, the Penn State Law University or Law School there at Dickinson, the Army War College, the Cumberland Historical Society, as well as AUSA and several others. And it is while it's a week-long symposium as a target, it's really a broader year-long series of engagements, perhaps, that will be focused on maximizing the civilian community's involvement and increase civil
interaction, and help the community and our nation's citizenry actually better understand the impact of conflict and the use of force on the society. We're working with a really broad coalition to do that, or of organizations, both military and civilian, and have already begun to enable a successful event. I think that will happen next fall, though we are all currently watching what does COVID do? You know, how do we do that? And I think we're going to see forums such as this being used more frequently, and maybe hybrids in the future. So all of these kinds of efforts are put together to help PKSOI maintain a strategic impact. And I mentioned earlier, we'll really do that primarily through support to the GCCs and the ASCCs as they work through their bilateral engagements with troop contributing countries, that support to the United Nations, and as well as working military engagements. We provide support to international peacekeeping training development, delivering and capacity building efforts to improve UN operations. One of the things we did last year was help publish the UN's Infantry Battalion Manual, and we'll provide updates to that as it goes on. And we've provided additional support in the study and development of field medical emergency response and technological capabilities that also support not just what the UN's doing, but our US national strategic objectives. As you talk about that and look at that, Colonel Liddick discussed the need for education to the force. One of the gaps that we identified a few years ago and have been working to fill is the need for a joint stabilization studies course. When the organization PKSOI contracted, it became very hard for us to develop that on our own and get it to the street, but we still recognize the gap and want to champion that. So we have partnered now with the Army War College to develop that specific course, to do something that can be put out not just to the joint force, not just to the CA force, but also to the interagency. And so we are in the midst of working closely with the Army War College as they develop that into what will eventually become a hybrid course of what we envision will eventually become a hybrid course that is developed, some proportionally done or some done asynchronously online, and coming together for a final exercise of some wargaming and such that that will then let it kind of come to fruition. And I don't have a lot of information on that because we have been really slowed down with the COVID development and how we would deliver that, and are meeting next week to see where we go in the next phase as we work in conjunction with the Army War College. And then I mentioned the lessons learned earlier, and I would just like to highlight again that we really look at publishing lessons learned on a regular basis and quarterly send out a call for lessons learned. We just sent out the multinational interoperability in PSO, Peace and Stability Operations, semi-annual lessons learned. We'll do that again. If you are interested in pushing a lesson that way, you can go to our website and hit that Ask PKSOI button. You can email me directly, and I'd be happy to get you linked up with the right folks in order to receive your input, and then also make sure we get you on the distro list to work that in the future. It's really important that we share these lessons as best we can until we get something in addition to just to spread the wealth there. It's not a problem necessarily for the direct community because you have access, but the broader community, if you could help us plug in, that would be really, really good. And then all of this is in my mind important that we be able to help the folks who are in the field. They're able to reach in and talk to us. And we had a really good success story. Just last month, we got reached out to by the folks at CJTF OIR to talk through lessons learned on stabilization and really help them solve some problems. And we're going to do that. You know, if the force reaches out, we'll do what we can to put together lessons learned and help you work through a problem set. And that's really why we exist and what we're here for. I think at the end of the day, PKSOI provides unique capabilities and relationships that really result in a wide range of outputs that are directly important to the Army, the Joint Force, and other U.S. government agencies, and help us advance the national defense strategy, national peacekeeping goals, and obviously stabilization by providing direct support to the interagency and working directly with the force. I know I threw a lot at you, quick and dirty, because I'm from Texas, but I still talk fast. and I'm happy to entertain your questions when we get to that portion of the discussion. So with that, I will pass it on to the next briefer.
Thanks a lot, Scott. Mark, over to you for some fantastic comments about where the Marines are going.
Yes, good afternoon. Get set here. I'll start off with a bluff. I believe that civil affairs has a key role in the great power competition, especially in the competition phase. And I'll start with where the Marine Corps is going in force design, and then discuss how civil affairs will play a key role in future operations. Let me give you two numbers to think about. One is 7,138, and the next one is 332. That's 7,000 plus civil affairs folks in the Army and 332 civil affairs Marines, most of whom are in the reserve component. So the Marine Corps civil affairs community is really small. That's less than 5% of the size of the Army CA force. So what that means is that the Marine Corps Civil Affairs has to focus on what is really most important, and that is enabling Marine Corps lethality in great power competition. So let me take a step back here. In July 2019, so a little over a year ago, the Marine Corps' new Commandant, General Berger, released his planning guidance. And it really set the Marine Corps on a decidedly different track. Prior to being appointed as the Commandant, he was the Commanding General of the Marine Corps Combat Development Command, which has some similar functions to your Army's Future Command. And in this capacity, he was involved in multiple war games and studies that showed our Marine Corps was positioned to win the last major conflicts, the Desert Storms, the Iraqi freedoms, but not necessarily a conflict with peer competitors such as China. So General Berger squarely focused the Marine Corps on China as the pacing threat and set a course to transform the Marine Corps into a force that could fight in a highly contested environment within enemy weapon engagement zones. So the Commandant said that he wants low cost, lethal air and ground unmanned platforms, unmanned long-range surface and subsurface vehicles, mobile rapid deployable rocket systems, long-range precision fires, loitering munitions across the echelons, mobile air defense and counter-precision guided munitions capabilities, signature management, electronic warfare, and expeditionary airfields. And all of that needs to be done inside of the weapon engagement zones for the Marines to be the stand-in force, taking on the role of both blunt and contact layer. So as General Berger has stated, those mobile, bad attitude, toolkit packing Marines are focused on a small set of tasks to achieve sea control and denial, sinking ships, shooting down planes, killing enemy forces inside the area, and stopping all forces from coming in. So this new way of war is captured in operating concepts such as EABO, the Expeditionary Advanced Base Operations, which is the Marine Corps' operating concept, distributed maritime operations that the Navy is working on, and then multi or all domain operations at the Army and the joint levels. So its operating imperatives include generating the virtues of mass without the vulnerabilities of concentration, creating a more dispersed, resilient, and hard to target forward-based infrastructure, creating a more resilient sustainment infrastructure capable of supporting distributed forces and operations, and winning the hider-finder competition. So to develop this new force, the Marine Corps will find cost savings by eliminating and reducing once sacred and beloved portions of our force. The Marines will eliminate all of its tank battalions, bridging companies, and its active duty law enforcement battalions. The Corps will disband 3 of its 24 infantry battalions, 16 of its 21 tube artillery batteries, especially those that can't fire hypervelocity rounds, and 2 of its 4 amphibious vehicle companies. The Marines will fold up the guidons on 4 aircraft squadrons, 2 attack helicopters, 1 tilt rotor, and 1 heavy lift helicopter squadron. The Corps will also squeeze some of its F-35 squadrons, reducing their complement of stealth fighters from 16 planes to 10. So the Commandant will use these cost savings to fund the new force, highlighted by the new MAGTAF, or the Marine Air Ground Task Force Unit, called the Marine Littoral Regiment, or MLR. The Marine Corps will eventually have 3 of these in the Indo-PACOM region, possibly around 2030. Each will be about 1,500 to 2,000 personnel and will be comprised of 3 battalions. A combat battalion, predominantly comprised of long-range precision fires, an anti-air battalion, and a logistics battalion. The plan would require Marines to live and operate well within range of Chinese missiles, playing a sea denial and skirmish role against the Chinese military. So the word live, I'd like to emphasize here. The major assumption is that these formations, these MLRs, will be able to operate in allied nations, and that the civilian population will invite us in with open arms, provide logistics support, and then not give up our positions during conflict phase. So the Marine Corps Civil Affairs must play a key role here. It is imperative that we characterize and shape the operating environment, along with our brethren from other information-related capabilities. Several options have been discussed within the Marine Corps, but they all center around conducting civil reconnaissance. It ranges from employing small 6-person CA teams to creating an all-domain reconnaissance unit of less than 100 to creating a task force with 300 plus personnel. Regardless of the force shape, size, and authorities, the Marine littoral regiments need to know about the areas that they will be operating within. So where are the good hide sites? Are the civilians supportive of the US? Where might the civilians support the adversary? Where can Marines get safe food, clean water? Where can MLR personnel access heavy lift equipment if needed? So the list of these information requirements is extensive. So for MLRs to be successful, though, Marines must help identify these operating areas, characterize the civil environment, and help shape that environment. So not to oversimplify, but my main point is that the Marine Corps Civil Affairs is a small formation that at low cost in the competition phase can have a large impact on MLR's survivability and lethality. And this doesn't mean that in Marine Corps Civil Affairs, we only do civil reconnaissance, and we have other roles and responsibilities. But this one best responds to our commandant's priorities and guidance. So with that, I'll wrap up this section with a few data points specific on civil affairs and the Marine Corps force design. So Marine Corps has placed a heightened emphasis on information as the 7th warfighting function, with civil affairs as a critical element. At each of the 3 MEFs, the Marine Corps stood up a new command called the MAGTAF Information Group, or MIGs. CA is integrating into these MIGs differently, and it will probably take us a while before we really figure out the best ways to operate these MIGs and integrate all the information-related capabilities. The Deputy Commandant for Information, 3-star, is picking up our sponsorship for civil affairs, which I think is a good thing for the Marine Corps Civil Affairs, especially during this phase we're in called force design. And at this point, there are no indications that we're going to take any reductions or additions in manpower for Marine Corps Civil Affairs. But there is talk about some things like possible mergers and information-related MOSs, but we're not really close to a decision on that topic. And finally, you might be wondering if those MLRs that I was talking about will include civil affairs. And the answer is yes, which is a positive sign, and I think a nod to the realities that it's not just the enemy that has a vote in combat, but it's the civilian population that does too. And then I'll finish by just saying the comments above, unless I stated they were from the Commandant, come from me and are not, and I am not with DCI. I'm a CO for 3rd Civil Affairs Group, and I'm not in the groups that plan future design. So there might be more current and up-to-date information than what I have. And if anyone is on that is a part of those groups and have more updated information, love to hear about it. All right, back to you. I think next up is Q&A.
Yeah, correct. Thanks, Mark. Great comments from everybody. Since you just spoke, I saw something about the integration of Army Sim and MAR Sim, and particular training for the Marines for their civil affairs. So if you take that one first, please.
Sure. So MARSIMS is our program of record for compiling the information that we use while we're doing civil reconnaissance or KLEs, et cetera. I think it needs to transform a little bit, though. For example, we need to find a better way than what we're currently doing, where it's air gapped and we to put it into the common operational picture. And like the person who had asked the question talked about JADC2, which is our new concepts, or the Joint Forces new concepts for command and control. That really means that it needs to be more data linked, more in the cloud, accessible to everybody. But I also think that it needs to probably go from unclassified to at least some means of integrating classified information, at least up to secret.
Thanks. And Dennis, from the I know Jay talked a little bit about what's going on. Any comments about where Army SIM is right now, and where do we stand for some type of rollout?
I guess Army SIM is going to be part of what we call civil knowledge integration. And but we have an initiative we've been working at the proponent called the Civil Affairs Solution Army, which ties into DSIGs and has a lot of AI, machine learning, and other sensor kind of based components to it. That Dr. Copeland, I think a lot of people are familiar with Dr. Lynn Copeland. She kind of initiated that, but she just left the proponent a few months ago, and we just established a new OPT internal to the Civil Affairs Capability Management Office, where we are taking the work she has done and some other folks in our proponent, and we will continue to work through the solutions for that. But it may take a little bit more time, and we were hoping to get a program manager approved for this this initiative, but that hasn't come to fruition yet. Over.
Got it. Thanks. And then if I miss, Scott, if you want to jump in there on any particular issue, just unmute yourself, speak up, and I'll shut up. Hey, so thanks for the thumbs up. Matt from ASD Solic asked about what happened to his question here. We'll turn to Brian Hancock. I'll get Matt in a second here. Hey, so what is the role of the CAGs, Mark, in the competition? You talked a little bit about that. And then, I don't know if you want to talk about, I don't know what Third CAG did for Cobra Gold this year, but I know the previous year I spent a week out there with Third CAG as Third CAG and 351 KCOM rotate between the Philippines and Thailand. How did all of that work out? And is it going in the right direction?
Yes, sir. So I think if the question is what do we do in the competition phase, I think clearly the answer is civil reconnaissance. How we exactly go about doing that is discussion, and then obviously in the COVID environment, that's less sure. I mean, how do we get out there if we can't get into some of these countries because of restrictions? When we were at Cobra Gold, and this was actually at the beginning of the COVID time, so this was in February timeframe of this year. What we did was we started to do some proof of concepts. So we worked with the Thai military. So their J5 is actually their civil military operations commanding general, and the joint staff level, I guess. And then we actually went out and did some civil reconnaissance in an area that was benign, not an area that we would actually want to do civil reconnaissance in, because it was just a test case and proof of concept. So we sent these teams out. They talked to different business owners. They talked and they found hide sites, potential ones for HIMARS units, et cetera, et cetera. And then we put it into an overall decision brief that said whether we thought this area was supportable or not for an MLR. And so as a template, that's what we came up with. And it's gotten some really good traction within INDOPACOM and MAR4PAC, and with General Bellin, who is MAR4 Res or Marine Forces Reserve Commanding General. So, yeah. So I think the answer there is the civil reconnaissance piece, and it worked well in Cobra Gold. Now we just have to get past COVID to start doing this real world.
No, fantastic. And that'll lead into Matt's comment here about updated individual and collective tasks to reflect new medals. Will it be catch-up training for personnel already in the branch? And so Jay talked a little bit about that, post-qualification course. What is the training plan for the branch, both, of course, active and reserve? Maybe start with you, Dennis, and then I think, Scott, there were some PKSOI overtones there with the course that you were talking about. Dennis?
Yeah, so I kind of put in the chat or in the Q&A, one of the answers is that right now our training development division at the CA branch proponent is looking at the new medal tasks that were developed out of the force mod assessment. They are monitoring all of the changes in doctrine that are taking place at the moment. And they're also developing a lot of the individual and collective tasks that will ultimately be integrated into the civil affairs pathway. I don't know yet, because they don't have all the solutions quite developed, how many or how much of a training program beyond the basic pathway will be developed. We always hope that they do develop some special kind of training programs outside of the basic pathway, but a lot of that is still yet to be seen. And again, it's in development in the operational planning team that training development division is running. Over.
Thanks. And Scott, maybe a little bit more about some of the stuff that PKSOI used to cover, and now what you're forced to cover, and then maybe your one or two training priorities for the force.
So I would sort of, if I could jump to the training priority, so to speak, I think there are really two areas that I would look at we are doing. And I would start off with stabilization tasks in primarily inside of exercises. That is an area that we're heavily looking at because the Army writ large, not really focusing there. When you look at peer-to-peer competition and really the large combat exercises, we've just kind of let it go. It's just not really there. There is some elements that are touched on inside of some of our warfighting exercises and the big exercises, but we don't see it in depth. And so PKSOI has tried to keep that in the forefront. We've tried to work it into exercises that are perhaps being developed by the Army Service Component Commands, so that they're looking at it, and we continue to talk about it. I think that the bigger piece that we're working is to get beyond training and into the education realm. And that's when we come back to that course that I mentioned of the Joint Stabilization Studies course, because we identified that gap primarily as a planning gap in the GCCs and broader. And personally, to me, it's a bigger than a civil affairs problem. That's a whole of Army problem or a whole of DOD problem and inside of the interagency. But at the end of the day, who do people look at to solve it? They look at us, the civil affairs operators. And so it's important that we try to address it. What I didn't want to have happen is the course become tied to just the branch, because then it becomes a SWIC issue and it competes in differing ways. I want it to be a broader education piece. In trying to build this course, or we're trying to have application to it and to everyone, that folks can get to this without necessarily being a CA guy, even though we know at the end of the day, we're the folks that folks are going to look at to answer the key questions that are there. And so that course is focused on some of the gaps that we see inside of policy and integration or interagency building for things such as defense support to stabilization, working both the national security strategy and nesting that with the military strategy and the defense strategy, some of the DODIs, discussions inside of the disarmament, demobilization, and reintegration, because we just don't really talk about that internal as any of our medal tasks, but we are going to get leaned on to look at those elements. trying to build out a course that gives folks an idea of, hey, where can I go get the answers? Because at the end of the day, we're not going to be able to build something large enough to make all of us experts. I may not be getting after your question, but I think that's the piece that I wanted to let folks know the most, is that we're really working with the Army War College to get this kind of a course on the street.
No, that was fantastic, framing that in. Thanks. And it's forums like this that make us all aware of who's working on what, so we can reach out for more specific details. But, you know, as in the old days, right, when it was just KPOC, right, and in 96 was, you know, a company laid down, and the 96 grew into the 95th. Then they said, oh, we need more civil affairs. 85th stood up. Now the 85th went down to the 83rd. In your opinion, sitting at PKSOI under CAC now, is the Army just willing to assume risk for stability? And, oh, yeah, by the way, you know, aid, state, and defense have all agreed that stability is inherently political in nature. So is DOD abdicating its responsibility and willing to assume risk? I'll pause there for comments, further education. Feel free to, you know, magically fall off the internet here if that's too touchy.
Hey, sir, since I'm not 100% certain who's on the line, but I'll go ahead and take a stab at it.
144 other people.
Very nice. You know, might as well just say it the way I see it from my optic. And similar to Mark, this is really what Scott Storey sees as he maneuvers around. I think the Army is looking at where does it have to pay bills and what is most important right now. And yes, there is probably some willingness to assume a little risk in certain areas. I wouldn't say that they are washing their hands of it. I would just simply say as a way out, where do I balance it? There is that willingness to assume risk. I can't speak to why certain decisions have been made, i.e. the folding of the 85th back down to the 83rd. I think that risk is primarily mitigated by the existence of KPOC and the reserve component. But I wasn't in that room, so I can't answer that question. I think that there is a look of, or a desire to say, hey, if we can do A, then we can do B. It's almost as if we've kind of, again, my optic as it had been a young lieutenant in the 90s, I kind of thought, hey, we can do major combat operations, we can do anything. But then, as you rightly point out, the SAR was very clear in that state and aid say, hey, stabilization is a primary political endeavor. And then it goes on to say DOD's role is security. But I don't think that each of the agencies see security as the same thing. Some folks look at it as, is anyone shooting at me anymore? And if they're not, then I'm good to go. And others will look at it as, is the environment not conducive or no longer conducive to people shooting at me? You know, so you have the immediate security versus a secure environment, or an environment that continues security. I don't think we all agree on that. And there's a lot of work still going as the SAR is maturing and the agencies are working through that piece. And I sit in those forums, but I don't know that we've all come to an agreement. I don't know we have the same I would say I don't think we have the same definitions between the three departments, and that creates some challenge, though it is pushing forward and going well.
No, thanks for that. We have Nick Williams here. He asked about Phase 4 return to competition. It's accomplished through CA tying into existing Prometheus PT governance structures. However, in large-scale combat operations, particularly against near peer, is that feasible? And I don't know, Dennis, maybe from a doctrine standpoint, you want to take a swag at that one?
Sorry about that. I'm having trouble getting that mute button fixed. You know, again, that's kind of what I alluded to earlier. That's exactly what our predecessors did in World War II, basically following lead combat forces and linking up immediately with people in populated areas, identifying who the initial leaders were and helping to organize the local populace against, civilian local problem sets. And as you said, if we identify and establish relationships early in some of the areas that we believe we will operate in the future, that will be facilitated. Obviously, if the folks in the networks we have established are disintegrated due to adversary actions or combat operations, we would have to quickly reestablish or identify what exists, what remains, and help organize those local assets at that time. But it is something that we definitely need to look at with our interorganizational partners. And someone else I think in one of the other questions asked, is this something we can do in experimentation? And it's definitely something that we have to address once we, within the CA branch, develop how we are going to employ our 38 Golf specialists and others, as well as working with our unified action partners and interagency partners. I think, Mark, you also had something you wanted to say on that regard. Over.
Hey, sorry, I'm trying to juggle answer questions at the same time, so I apologize.
Here.
Can you restate the question?
It has to do with our ability to work with local networks that may have been disintegrated during, combat operations or adversary actions, and I think it has to do with, military government post hostilities. I think you had
Thanks, Dennis.
something you wanted to say.
Yeah, so the Marine Corps, we don't really deal too much with. I'll say we deal with it differently, governance wise, than you all might. So nothing has really changed in the way that we've been thinking about how to handle those situations at this point.
No, thanks a lot. And then, Mark, are you working the David Gordon question about the experimentation in transitional military governance? I saw you wanted to answer that live.
Oh, if I did, I just hit their button incorrectly. Sorry about that.
Got it. Okay. Hey, so Dennis, I know we talked about the IMSG at previous points in life. What's the status of that? And again, not to beat a dead horse about risk and stabilization in phase 4, but if I'll close that one out if you have any closing comments on that.
Yes, sir. IMSG is a source of internal frustration for the proponent, primarily because we had, when it existed a few years ago, it was pulled together ad hoc by a lot of folks who were put on orders to help develop the program and develop the way ahead for military governance. But the first step that should have taken place was to develop a TDA organization that would move that forward. General Mason and his folks put the concept plan together, and it was approved by Headquarters DA almost 3 years ago now. And DA recognized the need for the IMSG and gave us the requirement, again, recognize or validate the requirement, but did not give us the resources. And the resources primarily require some active component, reserve component, AGR, and civilian positions to basically create that capability within the branch proponent. And to date, we have yet to get those resources authorized through TAA processes. We are continuing to push it through USASOC, and it may be again a little while before we get the resources put against those requirements. But in the meantime, I think Colonel Liddick mentioned Colonel DeJesse and some other folks from USACAPOC in the 38 Golf specialty arena who are focusing on developing internal CAPOC right now, some training programs focused on developing that capability within their force structure. And he also mentioned that we are leading an operational planning team. There's several operational planning teams right now in the works to start getting at the solutions that we developed in the Force Mod assessment. But this particular OPT is designed again to look at the employment of our functional specialty capability and what structure will be required internal to KPOC and others to execute that. And at the same time, we continue to focus on building the capability internal to SWCC. We also are looking for an alternative name to IMSG. We don't believe that IMSG is the proper name of that capability moving forward. But so sometimes we refer to the capability formerly known as IMSG. But I hope that answers the question at the moment. Over.
No, I appreciate the comments. And then Dennis, back over to you about CA structure. Has there been any consideration in expanding the CA force to the National Guard? Questions.
I didn't see that question, but the National Guard currently has about 163 positions at last count in their BCTs, in their division G9s, and some other S9 positions like in the maneuver enhancement brigades that may soon become protection brigades. But they're primarily staff positions at various echelons within their maneuver force and maneuver support. As far as creating civil affairs structure in the Guard, we kind of poked at it a little bit in the Force Mod assessment, but again, we've got no ongoing dialogue or engagement with the Guard Bureau on whether that is something that the Guard wants to take on. It may be something in the future, but not at the moment. Over.
No, thanks for the comments. And this out to the other panel, it's just a little bit of a take on that question. It is one of the force design, the force modernization of civil affairs is, we just don't have a lot of equipment, therefore, as people like to throw around, we're not part of the military industrial complex. So sure, there's 100 million, and make no mistake, it's still a lot of money. And PKSOI will understand what just a few $1 million can do, because when Secretary Asper went through, he was going through, and if you couldn't validate one single person, he took that away from you. Is it because we don't have a lot of equipment, we don't have a lot of backers, there's not a lot of industry behind us? Is that maybe one of the reasons that civil affairs it gets a little bit of shortchanged? And if anybody agrees with that, what can we do to mitigate that to be more valuable to commanders? Is that something being considered? I know Jay talked about, Colonel Liddick, civil information management, how that's changing, because it's not really the best term to describe what's going on. Maybe Scott, from the 95th, although it's been a little while, then what you saw at Corps, and then any Marine Corps comments, and then a closing couple of sentences on that from Dennis. Over to you, Scott. Thanks.
Hey, sir, thanks for pitching that my way. I mean, it's really an interesting question and something that I think we have to look at as a force. And I hadn't really ever thought of it from the idea of the military industrial complex side of the house. I've really thought of it initially as a problem that set on before we ever started into the long war that we're involved in now. And things we do don't condense well into the training environment. Things our force does don't fit well into an NTC training rotation that can provide the commander back some impact where he or she can see the benefit of having employed the force to do what it is that it does. And so I think initially it was hard to train. And then we roll into the impact of the longer conflicts inside of Afghanistan and Iraq, and we begin the 1-year rotation of folks, and it never really comes to fruition for that long-term engagement and then to see it. And I think that is a big portion as to why there is a willingness to accept some risk there, because we just don't have a mechanism that resonates with the commanders
to ring out as to what value the force is actually bringing to the battlefield. Fast forward to where we are today and get it outside of the actual battlefield and look at it inside competition. That's where I think we really will bring money to the table. And we aren't that expensive when you really think of it, though we can be. And as you talk about, talking about each of the dollars, there would be the question is why does such a small organization need such a large TDY fund in order to travel? It's because there's value in the relationship and value in the engagement that you just can't get from a video screener on a telephone, and it has to work through. But it does seem to be a bit of a challenge when a small organization has more funds than the rest of a larger organization. So that's just kind of from my optic, is it's just really hard for we just haven't found the way to articulate it in a way that resonates. Though we all probably kind of see it from an intuitive standpoint as to why we need to have these forces in their arrayed in a way they can be used. I'll pause there, sir.
Yeah, thanks. And then Mark, your comments, because I was at a undisclosed meeting in New York City with the previous commandant, and he poking me on the chest, mostly because I had a name tag on. And he's like, well, Chris, the 351 KCOM, they're going to pick up everything that, we've dropped in Indo-PACOM for civil affairs, right? That's going to happen. And I wanted to ask him, like, hey, sir, like, where's that inter-service memorandum of agreement that says the Army is going to pick up these gaps and these are the gaps? And, Dennis, I don't know how we capture all these gaps that are out there now to prove to the Army. Over to you, Mark, just for a brief a comment about what Scott talked about. And then Dennis, any force developments along that line, and then I'll move on to the next question. Thanks, Mark.
Yeah, thanks, sir. Appreciate that. Well, first off, it's so strange, a commandant poking somebody in the chest. I just
it
don't
wasn't.
buy it, right? Yeah, right. No,
he did have a drink in his hand.
Well, I might know which one it is then. Okay, so what I would say is that getting back to kind of the question about industry and all that, is that within the Marine Corps' concept document for civil affairs, it talks quite a bit about the ability to operate in certain areas, and a lot of it comes down to comms. And so I think there's some things we can look at in terms of communications. The other thing is AI, and it specifically calls that out. So like sifting through large quantities of social data or algorithms maybe for UAVs to do civil reconnaissance, or to maybe locating large groups or people or refugees that are clustering together. Those kind of things are some of the things that have been discussed. I don't necessarily know that we're going to get much money for that. So I agree with the statements that were made before on how I think it's difficult to get into some of that area. But yes, as for Indo-PACOM 351st, there's quite a bit to do out in Indo-PACOM, and a lot that we kind of have to get after. And this year, I think we really missed the meeting that they have every year. I think it's in June or July, to discuss and kind of share some of those tasks.
Yeah, I felt like asking General Cooper, a comment. I'd seen him out there a couple of times in Hawaii. That CASWIG, the Civil Affairs Synchronization Working Group, we did synchronize active reserves, Marine Corps, and I think one time we even had a Navy rep there, because we have Pacific Pathways for the Army, but Pacific Partnership for the Navy, and we had a great coordination to get people out there and do a lot of great civil reconnaissance. Dennis, any closing comments just about it? It doesn't seem we have enough people to latch onto us, and how can the 138 people still logged in on this help Fort Bragg sell the civil affairs story from mostly you care about Army, but also from a Marine Corps standpoint also.
Yes, sir. We always say we don't have a pacing item of equipment that the industrial complex would be interested in. But our pacing items are our soldiers and our Marines, and the capabilities that we bring to all operations across the competition continuum. Mark mentioned AI and machine learning and stuff like that, and we are actually just getting into that new piece of technology within our civil affairs solution that we talked about earlier, and through that and through the DSIGs, that's where we see providing a contribution to situational understanding, sharing information, and ultimately influencing how the commander views and understands the operational environment we're in. But of course, none of that can happen unless we are on the ground, engaging with locals, engaging with U.S. government agencies that are also on the ground, other NGOs that are out there. And if we are not afforded opportunities to get out there into theater, whether it's our Special Operations Force, our Reserve Force, or the Marines, then we lose that ability to tie into those systems ultimately. So, I think part of it is continuing to educate our commanders and our theater leaders, which we are doing initially through the Army Futures Command experimentation process and all the discussions we're having. But operationally, our theater CA planning teams are out there also trying to educate the force in theater on what we do. They're tying us into the theater plans. And I think we just kind of need to be doing more of that. And as our folks do go downrange, and you, of course, have the experience of being a KCOM commander and the access you have to leaders in theater to promote the capabilities and enable it to bring our capabilities on the ground. There's a lot of things going on in every theater. I listened to a podcast again on 1CA on stuff that's going on down in Southcom, and it's incredible, but I don't think we get the word out enough to the people that make a difference. So somehow, I know the CA Association is working on that, and we appreciate that, them doing that. We just need to do more of it.
Perfect. Thanks, Dennis. Hey, Scott, over to you. We'll close in the next 5 or 10 minutes to give people a break before the 1500 session starts off. From John Safula, retired Colonel, HQDA G3 SOD. He talks about getting CA to penetrate the deep areas. I mean, any context as the former 95th commander on civil affairs, linking up with the SF teams in the deep area, and then when some KPOC units might come forward.
All right, so now you got me digging deep back into the recesses of my mind and experience. That's been a year or two. I think really serious. You look at the restructure that happened under my tenure in the 95th, really becoming an operational unit underneath the Special Forces Command. That link up happens well before they're already into the deep areas. And so those habitual relationships are there. You have the relationship between the groups and the regional battalions that are already there. And so in many cases, what we have seen is those teams actually go forward inside with the Special Forces teams as they're going already, or at least to have some members doing that. I think some of the other pieces that you see with that are the way that the 95th is still operating with its SIMC elements and maintaining that long-term engagement inside of those kinds of exercises. But I think at that point in time, they would be providing those kind of pilot teams. What I don't have a good feel for, and perhaps someone out in the field can answer that question, is how do they make that handoff in the future? And I think that's what you asked me, and I'm going to tell you I'm not certain. I think it's something we just have to work on it and try to work through. I may not have understood the question correctly, but that's my best stab at the moment.
No, that's very well. Thank you. I appreciate that. Hey, Dr. Ernest Lloyd, former Colonel, 358 Brigade Commander there. asked about SSDCO. Maybe over to you, Dennis. Is that coming back anytime soon or ever as the CA's officer and NCO to, as Ernest put it, gain graduate level CA training?
Ernest, thanks for the question. I think there's no, again, formal plan within the training development division at the branch proponent, as I understand it, to recreate that. But I do believe that KPOC has entered into some agreements with places like UNC Greensboro to replicate the program that was trained there. And of course, there would be then some coordination needs to be made to ensure that credit is given for education credits, etc. But I'm not aware of anything at the moment. And I wish our branch proponent, Mr. Jim DeRizio, was here to answer that kind of question. But I'll look into it and get back to you if that's okay. Over.
Oh, sure. Thanks. We'll just get that posted. I think we're last call for questions here. There's one question here about maybe over to you, Scott, about the DOD's input into the SAR and should the Department of the Army have made a stronger pitch? Is there not a way to influence based upon the SAR's clear mandate for stability? It talks about the CA's regiment at a little bit of a disadvantage. I think you kind of covered most of that, but if there's maybe just talk about some of the things, your portfolio that you cover down, and you mentioned a couple of the different working groups that you're involved with.
Sure thing, sir. So we have a really good relationship with the OSD Shaw, who really is the primary DoD representation into the working groups that deal with the SAR. And so we may not have a direct voice at the table when they're speaking. We're in with them really on a weekly basis, working through those elements. So that's how the department puts their piece back into that overall working group. And because I have the moniker U.S. Army on my chest, and I hold that piece, I coordinate closely with the IWFMP folks, the Irregular Warfare Force Modernization Proponent folks at the CAC, who hold stabilization on behalf of the Army. We are coordinating before we put that input back through OSD Shaw back into it. So that's probably the best way the Army can have their input. I think the key thing is it's broader than a civil affairs problem. It's a whole of Army problem. And I think that's where it becomes a challenge of putting that input in a way that it can actually be actioned. And so I would be hesitant to try to hang it all back on the regiment, because the reality is if we do that, we'll become an insurmountable problem for us. And I think that's not a direct way to go.
I appreciate that. Hey, so we've been doing this about 95 minutes now, so I want to thank all remaining 135 participants for sticking around, and the three great panelists that we had right now, and then Jay in absentia there. Dennis, thanks. Great job covering down. Just raise your hand if anybody has any closing comments that they want about this particular subject, and we'll give people a 25-minute break before the 1500 kicks off. Dennis, anything else to add?
No, I've been, again, like Mark, I've been trying to answer some questions on the Q&A. So I hope some of that stuff is available after we shut down today. But I appreciate the opportunity once again to provide the proponent and force capability manager position on where we are and where we're going for the Army CA branch. And I look forward to the next opportunity in April. Over.
Thanks, Dennis. Mark, over to you for any closing perspectives.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Nothing further. I just want to say thanks for the opportunity to serve on the panel, and great questions. So I put my email address on there if anyone else had any further dialogue or any other questions they might have Marine Corps related. Thank you very much.
We appreciate it. Thanks. And then Scott, really appreciate you dialing in. Any other comments?
Sure. Again, I just want to thank the association and the fellow panelists and the forum for just coming together to have the conversation and us to continue to wrestle with these hard kind of problems. And if I can help in any way to anybody who's on the net, don't hesitate to either reach out to me on the global, or if you don't have that access, just go to that PKSO website and tag Ask PKSOI, and the question will come to me and I'll respond. But again, thank you for the opportunity, and I look forward to us working together again.
No, thanks. Great advertisement too about that PKSO. I asked that. I think that's such a valuable tool for organizations to have. Okay, with that, we'll wrap it up here. And everybody should have a separate link in their inbox for the next dialogue that happens at 1500. So again, thank you very much. I'll shut down in about 30 seconds here. Thanks.